The truth about the night Charlie Chaplin was banned from the U.S. surfaced the moment an unapproved cable hit the immigration desk. Pen stopped mid-stroke. A supervisor turned too quickly toward the door. An officer who'd been walking past stepped back as if he'd crossed into the wrong room. The cable contained a single line barring Chaplin's re-entry, signed off by a name that never appeared in the public explanation. It referenced a meeting that wasn't on any schedule and an action that shouldn't have been authorized after hours. The document was buried because revealing its origin would have exposed who actually ordered the block and why it had to happen that night. What decision inside that cable made Chaplin's return impossible to explain? If this story reached you, where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and let's see how far legends still travel. The official account of Charlie Chaplin's departure from the United States was presented with clean coordination. Headlines displayed the same smiling still from his latest film, framed identically across major papers. Interviews quoted him describing the trip as a rest abroad. The phrasing repeated word for word in 3 separate publications. Newsreels showed him boarding the ship with deliberate timing. A wave to the crowd, a brief exchange with crew, a final glance toward the pier. Press statements from the studio emphasized routine travel. Government spokespeople described his exit as a standard re-entry procedure, each using the same sequence of terms. Airport and port officials offered rehearsed comments about paperwork, none varying more than a sentence from the others. Crowds appeared in photos exactly where photographers expected them, holding the same banners across multiple angles. Chaplin's associates stood in consistent positions from clip to clip, as though arranged for continuity. Every public-facing detail aligned neatly: the reason for his departure, the timing, the assurances that nothing unusual had occurred. The surface held its shape, smooth, orderly, and predictable. Small cracks appeared if the picture was held still long enough. In one interview, Chaplin said he planned a short stay abroad, while another quoted him planning a months-long trip. A studio assistant present at the send-off in one version was absent in another retelling. A port record listed his boarding time as 9:12 a.m., yet a newsreel clock showed him stepping onto the gangway closer to midday. A photo caption described the ship as preparing for departure, but the background cranes indicated unloading activity instead. A government spokesperson avoided a question about a missing clearance form, redirecting to travel logistics. A magazine profile confidently stated the date of his intended return but offered no source, and later editions removed the sentence without note. One document outlining his routine re-entry approval contained an edit line showing it had been modified 3 times in the same afternoon, and a quote attributed to Chaplin about new creative plans overseas appeared in 2 separate articles but not in the recorded interview they cited. The inconsistencies were small, but they nudged the polished narrative out of alignment. A few individuals noticed these discrepancies long before anyone investigated. A reporter covering entertainment rechecked her notes after seeing the inconsistent return dates, circling one comment and leaving it unmentioned in her story. A coworker in the newsroom replayed the boarding clip twice, focusing on the shadows to estimate the real time of day. A relative of a studio employee avoided answering a question about Chaplin's travel plans, offering a short remark and changing the subject. A call placed to a port office was logged at an hour when no staff were scheduled on duty. A fan comparing stills from the send-off remarked that one banner shifted position between shots that were supposedly taken seconds apart. A studio staff member hesitated before confirming who accompanied Chaplin to the ship, then redirected to discussing his film schedule. A neighbor of a government liaison gave a clipped response about that week, without specifying what happened. None of these observations disrupted the public story, but they left faint marks around its edges. As coverage continued, the narrative began repeating itself too precisely. Press statements reused identical lines about routine procedures, even when asked unrelated questions. 2 longtime sources gave slightly different accounts of Chaplin's expected return date. A detail about his planned overseas meetings appeared in multiple articles despite never being confirmed. A photo of him waving from the gangway resurfaced, so often it became the default image, even when newer shots were available. A harmless inquiry about his re-entry paperwork received a refusal. A revised document appeared at a moment that fit the public timeline too neatly. The narrative fit almost too well. The first visible break appeared in a minor travel bulletin published 2 weeks after Chaplin's departure. The bulletin listed his ship's final departure time as 10:06 a.m., citing port logs as its source. But a separate set of harbor photographs, released that same month by a news agency, contained a timestamp at the bottom corner of one frame. 11:47 a.m. The image showed Chaplin already on the gangway mid-step, waving toward the pier. This wasn't a matter of lighting or angle. The timestamp matched the agency's internal coding sequence. The port's own manifest listed all passengers aboard by 10:20 a.m. The contradiction was small but direct. Chaplin was documented boarding more than an hour after the ship should have left. An editor noticed the discrepancy first, pausing while preparing a retrospective story. A junior researcher checking archive descriptions circled the timestamp. A staffer reviewing the photo set quietly pulled the bulletin closer. No one had an immediate explanation. The timeline, smooth, tidy, public, now contained one detail that did not fit within its own structure. Responses emerged in small, almost reflexive ways. A reporter interviewing a former port official froze mid-question when the official referred to the midday bustle, a phrase that clashed with the published departure time. Another reporter reread the bulletin twice, finger resting on the printed hour. A publicist asked about the timeline cleared his throat before giving a short answer about standard boarding procedure. A fan analyzing the archival footage paused one frame repeated, checking the shifting shadows. One historian offered a quick correction during a panel discussion, then retracted it moments later. A coworker in the newsroom went silent when someone mentioned the timestamp on the photo. 2 sources described the send-off differently. One said the crowd thinned before 10. Another insisted people were still gathering near noon. A photo editor zoomed into the timestamp, then zoomed out slowly without comment. A government spokesperson answered a question about departure timing too quickly, adding a vague reference to delays, which didn't appear in any earlier statement. Later, an interviewer asked for the exact sequence again, and the spokesperson replied with a clipped, "That's not relevant." Within days, attempts to align the timeline appeared. A revised version of the travel bulletin was posted, now listing the ship's departure as late morning instead of a specific time. An online article referencing the 10:06 a.m. departure quietly removed the exact hour altogether. A studio spokesperson issued a short explanation, stating that photographic timestamps may vary, without addressing the boarding sequence. Another statement, updated after initial publication, replaced a comment about prompt embarkation with a vaguer note about adjusted scheduling. One reporter seeking clarification was told the official who handled the port records was unavailable for interview. A documentary website updated its timeline graphic, shifting the departure marker several pixels to the right, making the gap less noticeable. Staff members discussing the inconsistency repeated the same line. Weather caused minor delays, despite no weather issues recorded that day. These corrections appeared quickly and uniformly, smoothing the surface while leaving the underlying mismatch untouched. After the adjustments, small signs of pressure settled in. A reporter stayed late, examining port logs digitized years earlier. Another double-checked archival public records and found no mention of any delay. A former official declined to speak about morning operations that day. Comment threads under re-uploaded departure footage began pointing out the same timestamp. The clip circulated again, replayed more than standard archival material. When asked a harmless question about crowd size near departure, a source gave a brief, indirect answer. 2 people who had been at the pier offered mismatched descriptions of the sequence. A clean narrative developed its first seam. At 9:28 p.m. on September 18, 1952, inside a small administrative room on the 2nd floor of the U.S. immigration station at Angel Island, 4 people were present: a night-duty immigration officer, a communications clerk, a supervisory agent from the San Francisco office, and an unexpected visitor, a Justice Department liaison whose name did not appear on the evening roster. The overhead lights cast a flat, steady glow. A metal fan on the filing cabinet rotated in slow arcs. A single window faced the courtyard, its blinds lowered halfway. According to the official record, no decisions on re-entry status were made after 5:00 p.m., yet the liaison arrived through the side stairwell, not the main entrance logged for visitors. The supervisory agent checked the hallway twice before stepping inside and closing the door without announcing a formal session. On the desk lay a sealed envelope marked with a routing code not associated with immigration matters. The clerk opened a fresh ledger despite the date already filled earlier. A phone on the table rang once, briefly, then stopped before anyone moved toward it. These were the first signs that the events of that night did not match the procedures later described. The supervisory agent set the sealed envelope on the desk and slid it toward the liaison. The clerk placed his pen down, then picked it up again as if waiting for direction. The communications officer checked behind him before pulling the blinds 2 slats lower. The liaison broke the seal and removed a thin set of papers, placing them face down. The agent flipped his notebook shut, although it had not yet been opened for the night. The clerk locked the drawer containing standard forms, then stepped back. A short sentence was exchanged between the liaison and the agent, spoken too softly for the room's dictation machine to capture. The communications officer placed his phone face down and angled the desk lamp to reduce reflection on the papers. A document was slid across the surface toward the supervisor. The liaison pointed to a specific line. The supervisor hesitated, then produced another form from his jacket pocket, one not included in the normal after-hours workflow. He placed it next to the first document. The clerk stepped to the hallway, looked both directions, and returned without comment. The communications officer shifted a small security camera mounted near the ceiling, turning it a few degrees toward the opposite wall. The liaison pocketed a small folded note that had been clipped to the original packet. The supervisor stood, crossed the room, and placed the after-hours form into the locked drawer the clerk had secured moments earlier. The drawer was locked a second time. A typed message was handed to the communications officer, who read it once, tore the bottom half away, and slipped the remaining portion into his folder. No one logged the exchange. The pivotal shift occurred when the liaison unfolded one page too far, revealing a document dated September 19, 1952, a full day after the meeting in progress. The form carried a completed re-entry bar recommendation, bearing the supervisory agent's signature. But the signature line showed no indentation or pressure marks, indicating it had been added by typewriter, not pen. The clerk fell silent, his hand still over the ledger. The supervisory agent straightened, adjusting his posture before quickly closing the document. The communications officer cleared his throat and reached for the stack of papers, but the liaison held them in place. The supervisor glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:41 p.m., hours after official decision-making ended. The liaison ended the meeting abruptly, gathering the packet with both hands. The clerk asked whether the form needed to be logged. The supervisor replied with a different instruction seconds later, contradicting his own response. The final motion came when the liaison exited through the unmonitored stairwell instead of the main corridor. The file that would later justify Chaplin's ban had been prepared, signed, and dated for a future day, before any formal review occurred. Immediately after the liaison left, the clerk rewrote the ledger line to omit the visitor's presence. The communications officer removed a routing slip from the desk and placed it into his coat pocket. The supervisor made a single call, delivering one sentence before hanging up. A form from the drawer was torn in half and discarded into a bin marked for incineration. A hallway photo from that night was deleted during routine film processing. The stairwell door was locked. Someone instructed the clerk, "Don't mention this part." This was the shadow behind the story. Within minutes of the liaison exiting the stairwell, the room shifted into controlled motion. The supervisory agent closed the file on the desk with a quick motion and moved it to the bottom of a stack on a side table. The communications officer made a brief, measured phone call, speaking a single sentence before hanging up. The clerk lifted the ledger, tore out the half-written line, and placed the torn strip into his pocket. A schedule taped to the wall was pulled down, its evening entries replaced with a clean version listing only daytime appointments. The small security camera in the corner was rotated back to its original angle, wiping away the earlier adjustment. A message alert appeared on the clerk's device. He opened it, deleted it, and set the phone face down without responding. The unsealed envelope from the liaison was moved from the center of the desk to a locked drawer, which the agent closed firmly. A fifth person, a night custodian, approached the office, but the communications officer redirected him with a short gesture toward the opposite staircase. The lights above the file cabinet were dimmed slightly, returning the room to its usual appearance. By the next hour, the rewritten account of the night began to take shape. A timestamp on the evening log sheet was crossed out and replaced with a different hour. Two staff members compared their notes. One pointed out a discrepancy. The other scratched a line through his page and rewrote it with fewer details. A draft of the nightly incident summary was prepared, then edited twice, first removing any mention of a visitor, then shortening the description of after-hours activity. A clerk paused before sending the updated message, deleted 2 lines and pressed send. 2 versions of the same statement were produced, one with a generic reference to routine administrative review, another omitting the entire section. A small contradiction in the supervisor's account of when he arrived was noted but left unaddressed. A file meant for headquarters was printed twice, once with a margin adjustment that pushed the timestamp into the fold. A staffer asked, "What exactly should we include?" And the response came back softly, "Only what's necessary." The evening calendar was updated to shorten the final entry from 1 hour to 10 minutes. Another email circulated with an attachment missing. No one requested the lost file. By morning, the adjustment spread across multiple offices. A short call went out from the supervisory agent's line. 1 sentence, then a disconnect. 2 administrators met briefly in a hallway, exchanged a folder without speaking, and walked in opposite directions. A document that would normally require a cover memo was passed directly to the communications desk with no explanation. The planned in-person briefing was replaced by a written summary delivered without signatures. A correction request reached the administrative inbox with no context, just an instruction to revise Section 3. Meanwhile, a scheduled meeting was moved to a smaller room, shortened to 15 minutes, and removed from shared calendars. A departmental update was delivered that omitted all references to off-hours activity. 2 conflicting instructions were issued 6 minutes apart, one calling for detailed notes, the other for the simplified version. A distribution list for the nightly summary lost 1 name without notification. A shared file passed through 3 desks, each time missing one of its attachments. When a junior employee asked which version of the timeline to use, the answer came back, "Follow the main version," with no clarification as to which that was. By the end of the week, the revised account solidified. A final draft of the reentry review was approved within seconds of submission. A signature from a senior official appeared on the summary despite no meeting to authorize. The associated file was moved to a restricted access cabinet. A paper folder containing the original ledger scrap was placed in long-term storage with no label. The stairwell door used by the liaison was kept locked. A digital record of the night was time-stamped hours after its documented creation. A final message circulated, "This should be enough." No one added the missing part. In the weeks after the night decision, everyday routines inside the immigration station altered in small, visible ways. A clerk who usually cut through the central corridor began using the longer route by the back stairwell. 2 officers approaching each other near the records room lowered their voices automatically as they passed. Instructions at morning briefing started coming twice. A directive delivered, then repeated with nearly identical wording. A staff member stopped mid-sentence during a status report, restarted with fewer details, and moved on. Files that once slid quickly between desks now sat in trays for several extra minutes before being handed over. Scheduled meetings began starting 5 to 7 minutes late, with people waiting just outside the door before entering. One employee checked his badge twice at the same checkpoint. Another reviewed the same 3-page memo, flipped back to the first page, and read it again without making notes. Conversations near the elevators ended the moment a third person approached. A supervisor corrected a minor date in a routine report that already matched the source document. A summary was printed, reprinted, and the second version carried one line with fewer words. Phones stayed face down. Laptops closed as footsteps passed behind chairs. Formal processes began to drift. Standard forms reached the admin desk with required sections left blank that had never been skipped before. 2 different versions of the same weekly activity report circulated, one listing after-hours administrative review, one ending at 5:00 p.m. A case file was updated twice within 4 minutes. The second revision removed a reference to an evening discussion. Meeting notes, once multiple paragraphs, shrank to brief bullet points. An instruction memo that originally used direct language, "shall document," was rewritten as "may document." A junior officer started double-checking the signature on reentry decisions before logging them, aligning it against a list not usually consulted. A report was returned to its writer marked "revise," with no further explanation. A request intended for the reentry unit was forwarded to the Public Information Office, then sent back with a short redirect note attached. Timestamps on an internal log showed an entry recorded before its stated review time. A standing appointment on the calendar shifted from Reentry Case Review Chaplin to General Review, with the name removed. A policy sheet from headquarters arrived with one line quietly missing from the section on discretionary holds. A supervisor sent an abrupt message: "Use the simplified version," attaching a shorter template. A spreadsheet already marked complete was still missing one column. Before forwarding a routine email, a clerk removed the attachment containing draft language. Among staff closest to the Chaplin file, changes were sharper. Coworkers who normally exchanged brief hallway remarks began looking past each other, moving on without stopping. Answers during internal check-ins became shorter, limited to basics. A small disagreement over where to store an older file ended quickly with an uncharacteristic "whatever works," and no further discussion. 2 employees started to speak at once during a review session, offering different starting points for the same event, then stopped and deferred to the supervisor. One analyst checked behind him before pulling a marked folder from his drawer. Whispered conversations near the break room cut off abruptly when footsteps approached the doorway. An officer who usually left right at shift's end walked out early 3 days in a row without logging it on the whiteboard. Another stayed more than an hour past closing, seated alone, with a stack of archived reentry cases. A supervisor reassigned a routine notification duty from someone familiar with the Chaplin paperwork to a staffer from another team. On shared terminals, messages appeared briefly and then vanished from inboxes. 2 staff members exchanged notes on the same night's activity and discovered their versions listed different times. A clerk rewrote the same line in a summary twice, each time making it more general. For one normally busy mid-morning hour, the usual office chatter dropped away. Outside the building, small irregularities began to register. A journalist sent a formal request to the agency asking for clarification on the exact timing of Chaplin's reentry review. A draft public statement about routine immigration procedure was revised shortly before release, its mention of evening decisions removed. A line referencing cooperation with external agency disappeared from a press note between its first and second versions. A spokesperson asked for additional time before answering a basic question about reentry protocols. 2 different figures describing annual reentry denials of notable persons appeared in separate official reports. A released file lacked an attachment referenced in its own index. Overnight, a small update altered one statistic on the agency's public webpage. An inquiry opened by an oversight body used minimal language, naming only dates and case numbers. Inside, a records clerk locked the same drawer twice before leaving for the night. On another floor, a file with Chaplin's name stayed open on a screen while its user watched the hallway. In a side office, his name was spoken once in low volume, then avoided. A single folder sat slightly out of line in an otherwise neat row. Nothing fit cleanly anymore. The first unmistakable inconsistency sat inside Chaplin's reentry file, a reentry review summary, typed on a single sheet and dated September 19, 1952. Its header listed the case number, the reviewing officer, and the designation "Final Recommendation." Below, a short paragraph stated, "Subject's reentry inadvisable at this time. Decision reached upon standard evening review." The contradictions were embedded in the details. The timestamp in the upper corner, 7:42 p.m., occurred on a night when, according to office records, the evening shift had been dismissed at 6:00. The reviewing officer's signature matched his official one, but the pressure indentations normally left by his pen were absent. This signature was flat, printed by a typewriter. A routing stamp at the bottom read "Processed, 9/19/900," though the document itself claimed it was finalized the previous night. On the carbon layer beneath the page, faint impressions revealed an earlier version of the same form, dated September 18, not 19. Nothing in the file acknowledged that earlier version. Once the summary sheet was examined, additional fragments formed an emerging pattern. A lateral L movement log for September 18 showed a folder transferred between the immigration station and the San Francisco field office at 9:37 p.m., but the vehicle dispatch report listed no outgoing transport after 7:55 p.m. Two internal memoranda concerning Chaplin's potential security implications appeared out of order. One written at 4:10 p.m. referenced a meeting concluded at 21:15, while the second memo, timestamped 9:22 p.m., referred to a discussion scheduled for tomorrow morning. The communications ledger contained a 22-minute gap between logged phone calls, exactly overlapping the missing window in the building's activity log. A correction sheet from the microfilm conversion showed that the Chaplin file had undergone 5 edits to the same line, each one modifying the date of the reentry determination. 2 separate statements issued years apart, one by immigration, one by justice, repeated the identical phrase, "Review completed in alignment with standard post-hours procedure." The phrasing matched exactly, including spacing and punctuation, though the agencies used different style guides. Finally, a photography inventory from the station listed 2 images allegedly taken the night Chaplin left the country. The backgrounds were different, yet the descriptions claimed they documented the same moment. Interview records offered further unintentional confirmations. A retired immigration clerk hesitated when asked for the exact date of Chaplin's classification, answered the 19th, paused, then added, "or the night before." A former communications officer checked his phone before responding to a question about after-hours calls, then amended his statement to match the official timeline. 2 witnesses who had worked security gave conflicting sequences. One recalled the liaison arriving before full dark. The other insisted he came near closing. Neither version aligned with the logs. During one interview, a former supervisor adjusted a document placed in front of him, sliding a page over a line referencing evening coordination, though the question had been about daytime operations. Another subject repeated, in 2 separate interviews, the same line found in both agency statements, completed per standard post-hours procedure. A source familiar with the building layout refused to discuss the room on the 2nd floor, though no room of that designation appeared in the official plans released later. An expert reviewing the file pointed out that Form I-313, required whenever reentry was denied, was missing entirely. 2 individuals, interviewed separately months apart, used the same unusual wording. That hour wasn't supposed to matter. The final piece surfaced in a mislabeled storage box, a dictation cylinder, stored in a cardboard sleeve marked only 1952, admin. Inside was a wax cylinder containing a short audio log stamped Sept 18, 2203. The recording captured a portion of an entry typically transcribed into the nightly summary. The audible fragments included, liaison present, pending recommendation, finalized tomorrow morning, hold classification until instructed. The voice on the recording matched the supervisory agent's personnel file recording from earlier training sessions. On the sleeve, a penciled note read, "Copy made," followed by the initials JM. The same initials appeared on the misfiled routing memo dated September 18. The existence of the cylinder contradicted the written logs, which recorded no dictation entries after 6:00 p.m. that night. It confirmed that a decision was drafted before the official meeting was documented, and that the final date applied to the paperwork was not the date the determination was made. By assembling each fragment, a clear structure emerged. The timeline repeated the same missing hour. The reentry decision was drafted before the date that appears on the final form. The same signature appeared in pen on earlier record and as a typewritten facsimile on the denial. Two accounts placed key personnel in locations not recorded anywhere. A document added later contradicted the original draft beneath it. A restricted area on the second floor was accessed without explanation in the precise window of the undocumented meeting. The pattern left no space to hide. The overlooked detail sat in plain sight. A name typed in the lower left margin of the misfiled routing memo dated September 18, 1952. It read, "For review, A.S. Harlan." The name never appeared in any official summary. It was absent from the Angel Island duty roster. It did not appear on visitor logs, transport manifests, or Justice Department attendance sheets for that week. The notation used a smaller type size than the main memo and was aligned slightly off the standard margin. The memo itself was stored in a box connected to an unrelated case. The same name appeared one more time, small, faint, on the reverse side of the dictation cylinder sleeve, written in pencil and partly smudged. No one had referenced it in any interview, report, or index. A search through unrelated archival folders produced the first link, a clearance card for A.S. Harlan, dated 1951, listing the title Assistant Liaison Interagency Projects. The card carried the same initials, A.S.H., found on the margin of the September 18 memo. A second link emerged in a forgotten equipment checkout ledger. The dictation machine used during the unlogged hour on September 18 was assigned to Harlan for 2 consecutive days, including the night of Chaplin's off-record review. The checkout timestamp, 17:02, preceded the time Harlan later claimed to have left the building. The third connection came from a visitor pass stub recovered in a bound logbook. The pass for September 18 had been manually removed, leaving a clean tier, but the carbon impression beneath it still showed the initials ASH. 2 witness interviews, recorded months apart, included an unusual line used by both. The liaison wasn't who they said it was. Neither interviewee had been shown the other's transcript. Finally, the misaligned typeface used to add Harlan's name to the routing memo matched the typeface used in a second, little-noted document. The early, overwritten version of the reentry review summary dated 1 day earlier. The final alignment came from a personnel directory recovered from the National Archives Annex. It listed A.S. Harlan not as a mid-level liaison, but as a temporary Justice Department contractor assigned to special classification projects, with authorization to conduct after-hours evaluations without appearing on standard rosters. In the same directory, Harlan's assignment ended on September 19, 1952, the exact date later stamped on Chaplin's official denial. The reentry review summary bearing the supervisory agent's typed signature had been formatted using Harlan's clearance code, not the agent's. A later internal audit confirmed that the second-floor room used the night of September 18 was approved for access by only one external figure that week, Harlan. The decision that supposedly resulted from a formal review was, in fact, drafted by someone who was never acknowledged as present. Nothing was hidden, only ignored.